It has happened again. We've warned about it on this program since October the 9th last year. I tested your patience earlier this week, showing you how often and how long we've been calling out the weakness of Anthony Albanese and the state governments as they've stood by and let anti-Semitism rise. And now it's getting worse. The synagogue firebombed in Melbourne last Friday, a couple of worshippers inside. No lives lost, thankfully. Many lives terrorised, though. And in Sydney's eastern suburbs last night, just like last month, a car set alight and anti-Israel slogans defiling a house and sending a chilling message around the country. Of course, this vile act was condemned by all.
What is obviously a shocking morning in Sydney's east as we respond to what we regard as a hate crime on the streets of Sydney, a violent act of destruction, clearly anti-Semitic, designed to strike fear into the community that lives in this part of Sydney. I want to make it clear that this is antithetical and completely opposite to the kind of community and society that we want in Australia in 2024. This violent act will be met with the full response from New South Wales Police.
Two males who were disguised were seen running from that location. We believe in their late teens, early 20s. A police response, a full response is underway and had commenced immediately with local, region and terrorism police being called out last night.
And all eyes and ears were again on the Prime Minister after he was heckled at the Adass Synagogue yesterday, visiting more than 4 days after the firebombing, but not staying for questions. Albanese spoke early today on the ABC.
This incident in the eastern suburbs of Sydney is an outrage. It is another anti-Semitic attack, and all Australians must condemn it. I've spoken with the AFP, Commissioner Kershaw, this morning. I'll be briefed by AFP Operation Aberline officials as well. I stand with the Jewish community and unequivocally condemn this attack. There's no place for anti-Semitism in this country or anywhere else for that matter.
Still, even on the ABC, most of the PM's time was spent defending his lack of action over the past 14 months.
We now have legislation before the Parliament to criminalise hate speech, including the urging or threatening of force or violence against either individuals or groups because of who they are and what their beliefs are. So we have consistently taken action. We'll continue to take action. We'll continue to take advice as well from the Special Envoy, and we'll continue as well to listen to and to engage with our police forces and the appropriate authorities.
Just horrible to listen to, isn't it? Where's the conviction? Where's the clarity? Where's the leadership? Later, reporters tried for more on camera.
Critics have said it's about changing, Labor's changing policy. What do you say to that?
What is your message to the Israeli government?
What is your message, Prime Minister?
And later this afternoon, the Prime Minister visited the Jewish Holocaust Museum in Sydney's Darlinghurst, just a few kilometres from where the anti-Semitic attack sites in Wallara were. Better late than never, I guess.
This is quite horrific. It is something that is, I think, quite shocking. Not what you would expect in a country like Australia. What we're seeing needs to be a very clear message that is completely unacceptable. It needs to stop.
But all this has been true for more than a year. So this from Albanese today looks like either sorrow or desperate political catch-up. I mean, with all this going on, I took my own kids to that same museum back in April. Anyway, more tellingly, a senior Labor figure, the former Army Colonel and Defence Materiel Minister Mike Kelly, has told me that Labor's abandonment of Israel in diplomacy and public debate is playing right into the domestic extremism.
You know, we know where this leads. It's a stepping stone. And what really disturbs me and concerns me now, and the risk there at Adass was the loss of human life. And so it's time now to ante up, to really make this a bipartisan push and pump the brakes on all this, virtue signalling at the UN.
Kelly suggests that lives are at stake here, and he implores Labor to stand by Israel and stamp out anti-Semitism, slamming Foreign Minister Penny Wong over those comments I showed you last night, lumping Israel in with China and Russia. I'll have Mike Kelly's full interview later in the program. We also need to touch on the key factor that nobody seems willing to discuss: the role of the Australian Muslim community. Not all Muslims, of course. Most Muslims love this country and contribute to it in a peaceful and positive way. But we can't ignore how virulent hatred against Israel comes from some elements of the Muslim community. We saw that on October the 8th last year.
It's a day of courage!
And we saw it again, infamously, the following night at the Opera House. And we've heard vile hate preaching from religious leaders.
The trees will speak, the stone will speak, and they'll say, "O Muslim, O believer, there is a Yahudi behind me, come and kill him."
This is the stuff that our political leaders have failed to confront. They avert their eyes. This is the stuff that strikes fear into the hearts of Jewish Australian families. And in this climate, the Albanese government has brought in hundreds of refugees from Hamas-controlled Gaza without extensive security checks. Former Prime Minister Tony Abbott has carefully addressed all this in The Australian today. Abbott says we shouldn't wimp out on the immigration debate. In most Western countries, the anti-Jewish tirades, near riots and mini Kristallnachts started even before Israel's just war against Hamas in the aftermath of the October the 7th atrocity, Abbott notes. Yet authorities have danced around prosecuting or deporting hate preachers, clearing encampments and banning disruptive protests because they don't want to be accused of a non-existent Islamophobia, especially by the militant leaders of poorly integrated immigrant communities, which in Australia and even more in Britain now comprise a large proportion of some cabinet ministers' electorates. That's a tough but well-founded observation from the former Prime Minister. Abbott's daring to point out something that our leaders, certainly Albanese and his Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke, twist themselves in knots to avoid. Abbott goes on to say that having a non-discriminatory immigration policy doesn't mean accepting everyone from anywhere all the time, especially as their migrant sources diversify. Settler societies need a strong civic patriotism to replace fading ethnic and religious ones. Yeah, these are tough issues, and we need to be able to discuss them without being accused of Islamophobia. And one way to reassure people right now would be for Muslim community leaders to speak out against the anti-Semitism, against the terrorist symbols, and speak out against the hatred. So far, their silence has been deafening.